The Honourable Member Brendan Byrne.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I think that it's important to acknowledge at the outset the importance that the Labor Party attaches to the trading banks, most notably as evidenced by this bill, Westpac New Zealand. Westpac New Zealand. Obviously banks are necessary to the functioning of a modern economy. But I still also remember my old dad's dictum about banks, which I think reflects the public view sometimes of banks. He used to say that banks are entities that give you two umbrellas when it's sunny and ask for them both back when it starts raining. And that wisdom, I suppose, has imbued a certain caution in me about banks, and it's not always, I feel, a caution that is reflected by banks themselves. And I do sometimes wonder whether Westpac, as an example, is remembering our very recent history. And just last night on television, I saw an advertisement for Westpac, I believe. It showed a couple in a small, modest flat, the woman gazing across the road as somebody was moving into a big house, old villa, and the advertisement basically said, "Why wait? Why wait?" and advertised that you can buy a house on 5% deposit. And I think that and then the advert showed this couple having moved into what I guess would be, in Auckland terms, at least a villa worth $750,000 or thereabouts. And I think that that is illusory. I think it's unreal. I think it's enticing, and I think it's provocative, and I think it's also breathtakingly short-term in view, because it fails to take account of what we have been through in our very, very recent history. And you just have to ask sometimes, what are the sort of fundamentals that the trading banks, including Westpac, are operating under? I mean, what happens in a situation where somebody buys a house on 5% deposit and house prices collapse, as some commentators still believe is going to happen at some point over the next year or two? And I have to pick up on the speech of my colleague Stuart Nash and acknowledge the issue with dairy farmers. The average debt of a dairy farmer at the moment, be they a Westpac New Zealand customer or any other trading bank, is $2.8 million. $2.8 million in borrowing. No wonder they're only able to pay $30 a week in tax, because they are struggling to maintain any semblance of principal repayment when they've got debts of that level. And of course it takes two parties to dance in respect of debt. One is the farmer wanting to expand, wanting to grow, wanting to acquire the neighbour's property, wanting to increase the size of the herd, and then the bank to fund them into that proposition. But if the reality is that the farmer actually is only paying $30 a week in tax, there is something wrong with that fundamental. When a farmer with a turnover of $1 million+ is actually only able to pay $30 a week in tax, there is something very seriously wrong. There's a real shortcoming there in respect of that. And you only need to contrast it with the financial borrowings of the dairy farmers across the Tasman, who also are likely in many instances to be Westpac customers. But there seems to be a more prudential approach being taken there, because according to Rod Oram's column of last Sunday, the average debt of a Victorian dairy farmer, by example, was under $1 million. Under $1 million. So we're talking nearly three times the borrowings by New Zealand dairy farmers under banks such as Westpac, and yet their equivalent across the Tasman, around a third of that debt. Now that says to me there are going to be consequences. When we see farmers only paying $30 a week in tax, they are only able to pay perhaps $1 out of the $7.50 a kg return in principle, if they're lucky. And that's if the prices hold up, and that of course is not guaranteed. This bill that doesn't deal with those issues, I acknowledge, Mr Chair. We leave the prudential management to the Reserve Bank, but it is still worth noting those points. This bill is about having the regard to the Reserve Bank's policy of local incorporation. That's a very sound policy. We want to see banks with as much New Zealand component as possible, and this is transferring some of the assets held by the broader Westpac Corporation through to the New Zealand arm. So this will underpin the financial viability of Westpac New Zealand. That is welcome.
I call the honourable member Amy Adam.
I move that the question be now put.
No, I'm going to call the